On the 1st of July 1916, along this ancient track in the Somme region of France, men of the 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers waited quietly. Above them, the largest bombardment in the history of mankind was reaching its zenith. Within minutes, they would advance into no man's land and a hail of machine gun fire. Many of these men, captured for the first and perhaps last time on film, would not live to see the end of that day. In this video, we'll use the latest technology, veteran testimony, and this incredible wartime footage to tell the story of one group of men who fought over a century ago in the Battle of the Somme. The Somme itself as a battle is often misunderstood. Many see it as another futile attempt of British generals to break the German line and reach Berlin. But in 1916, the objectives of the Somme were somewhat different. An attempt not to win the war, but to keep it going. This all stemmed from events around another infamous location, Verdun. In February 1916, the German army had launched a huge offensive against the French army around that symbolic town, and over the course of months of fighting had driven the French from many key locations. General Erich von Falkenhayn's famous desire to bleed the French white at Verdun was taking effect, and there was a very real risk that sustained pressure on the French could end in German victory. And so, the idea in its simplest terms was that a joint Anglo-French attack further north in the hitherto quiet Somme sector could draw away German reserves and thus relieve pressure on the French at Verdun. In short, they could live to fight another day. That said, planning for an offensive on the Somme was in the works as early as November 1915, though with the events at Verdun, the emphasis shifted and the British agreed to take the leading role. So let's take a look at the Somme region itself. The area of the battlefield to be fought over actually covered about 24 miles in length, with the British controlling the 18-mile northern sector and the French the southern 6 miles, ending on the River Somme. It was to be a huge attack, involving unprecedented numbers on a massive scale. The strategic objectives were roughly as follows. British and French troops would advance along the entire Somme front and break through German positions, capturing local strongpoints and threatening the German supply centre at Beaumont at the end of the old Roman road bisecting the battlefield. In doing so, the Germans would be forced to redeploy units from the Verdun sector to counter the threat to its rear areas. In this video, our focus will be on just one small but important sector of that northern British front, here at Beaumont Hamel. Set just north of the River Ancre, Beaumont Hamel was a little-known village in the years before the war. Quiet, unassuming and distinctly rural, it had come as quite a shock when the trench lines of the Western Front had settled here in 1914. Occupied early in the war by the German army, it had been fought over but not too heavily in the first few years. But importantly, the Germans, who adopted a defensive posture here, had a long time to prepare their defences, and they did it very well. The trench system outside Beaumont Hamel was a veritable spider's web of interlocking networks which made best possible use of the terrain. Over 18 months they developed a system of multi-line, in-depth defences which protected the village, which as we see here was nestled in a shallow valley with distinct high ground on either side. Not only that, but the Germans had also dug down. The area was crisscrossed with tunnel systems and deep dugouts which were impervious to all but the heaviest British artillery. Breaking the line in this sector would be very difficult indeed. The British lines opposite, adopted from the French, were also elaborate but less well constructed. They lay in this sector approximately 480 yards from the German positions, with this area, the famous no man's land, separating them. So let's take a look in a little more detail. As we overfly the battlefield today, we see that the high ground here dominates the landscape, with the key prominent point, the Hawthorne Ridge, being home to a German strongpoint or redoubt. Heavy machine guns here could cover the whole valley. Further along, on the other side of the valley, was another redoubt known as the Bergwerk. Machine guns here in these two locations, along with the trenches joining them, formed a formidable obstacle for any attacker. Also in this sector, running across part of no man's land, was this feature, known at the time as the Sunken Road. Predating the trenches by centuries, it was an old track which offered rare cover in no man's land, and the possibility of attacking German positions from much closer, thus increasing the chances of success. On that point, let's understand what needs to be achieved in somewhere like Beaumont Hamel. In its most basic form, it's the race to the parapets. If the British could get out of their trenches, cross no man's land and reach the German trenches before they could react and get their own machine guns firing, they would have a good chance of capturing that position. If not, well, we can guess the outcome. Once captured, the plan would be to push on to the German second, then third lines, and so on. All across the Somme on the 1st of July 1916, the race to the parapet would take place, with varying success. When it came to British planning though, the real risk came from the Hawthorne Redoubt. Without it being neutralised, the chances of success were low, and so, early in 1916, a plan was put in place and specialist tunnellers were brought into the area with the idea of digging a tunnel under the German strongpoint, filling it with explosives and blowing it up shortly before the attack started. In general, a very good idea. One tunnelling officer who was involved in digging that mine remembered the experience many years later.
By the end of May, the gallery had been driven out over 900 feet and was giving considerable trouble on account of the hardness of the chalk and the large amounts of flints in the face. From this point, only 150 feet from the enemy, it was essential that the work should proceed silently, and in order to facilitate this, the face was drenched with water to soften it, and the chalk and flint prized out with the bayonet, the lumps being caught by the hand to prevent them falling on the floor with a thud, and so disclosing our position. In due course, the drive reached its objective, and the chamber was constructed. Into this was loaded a charge of 40,600 pounds of ammonal. All was in readiness for zero.
The other ace the British had to play was artillery, and lots of it. The intention was to bombard the entire German line with literally millions of shells, completely shattering the German defences, meaning that on Z-Day, as it was known, attacking troops could advance at a walk, keeping good order and occupy the destroyed German lines. It was a very high-risk strategy, as if the artillery failed to reach those deep German dugouts, the consequences could be disastrous. Artillery also had a devastating effect on the landscape, as we can see in some incredible aerial imagery of that time. Taken both before and during the battle, these aerial images allow us to reconstruct the battlefield like never before. Here we see the German and British lines around Beaumont Hamel in the Ancre Valley, including many shell holes which are always associated with the Great War. We should add a couple of caveats in here though. Prior to the 1st of July attack, the ground was far less torn up than we often believe. In many places, untended crops still grew in fields and were more than waist high. And importantly, the weather leading up to July had been relatively dry. The idea of attacking through knee-deep mud as we see in places like Passchendaele was not true here. In fact, the 1st of July 1916 was a pleasant summer day on the Somme. So what about the troops here? Well, around 120,000 troops would go over the top on the Somme on that first day, but in this area, it was a group of around 600 men of the veteran 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers. A pre-war professional British unit, they had already fought in the ill-fated Gallipoli campaign, but were experienced and reliable and part of the elite 29th Division. Let's look at a few key characters. Leading the battalion was this man, 36-year-old Meredith Magniac. A colourful character and courageous leader, he was a keen pre-war England cricketer and affectionately known as the Maniac by his men. Another officer was young William Caseby of C Company, born in Fife, Scotland, and officially an officer in the Royal Scots. He'd been attached to the Fusiliers for some time. Also within the ranks of C Company that day would be Corporal George Ashurst, a 21-year-old Wigan native who had been an office clerk before joining the army in 1912. Uniquely, especially given that this happened over a century ago, we can also call on the important contributions of this man, British cinematographer Geoffrey Malins. His job that summer, along with another cinematographer, was to embed himself with the units in France and to record the events of the big push to be shared with the British public at home in cinemas. It was he who would take possibly the most iconic footage of the entire war at Beaumont Hamel. So, by the 30th of June 1916, the British bombardment of German positions was in its 6th day, with shells slamming into German trenches at a rate never seen before in world history. The Lancashire Fusiliers, after a short period of intense training behind their own lines, filtered up to their start positions for the attack, with Geoffrey Malins in tow. In this remarkable footage, Malins actually captured the men of C Company as they passed through the trenches, with Sergeant Major Nelson of C Company clearly seen directing troops. Standing next to him, and unusually wearing other ranks rather than officers' equipment, is a second lieutenant, possibly William Caseby. By now, not only was the mine under the Hawthorne Redoubt complete, but a second tunnel had been constructed, a much shallower Russian sap which had provided access for 2 companies to infiltrate into the sunken road. and so B&D companies would be attacking from the shelter of the sunken road, some 180 yards from the German line. An A&C company would attack from the main British front line, crossing this stretch of no man's land, approximately 480 yards, all aiming to capture and hold this stretch of German front and infiltrate into Beaumont Hamel village and the heights beyond. Let's head down to the sunken road. At 6:30 am on the 1st of July 1916, over 300 men lined this very spot as Malins began to crank the handle on his camera. In this iconic footage, he captured men of B&D companies waiting for the off. The footage itself is truly captivating. Some men are quietly chatting, others enjoying the novelty of being on film, and no doubt many others in quiet contemplation of the attack to come. Malins stayed a few minutes before returning to a position known as White City to film what was to come. And so, at 7:19 am, Geoffrey Malins occupied this exact spot and turned his camera towards the hillside, beneath which lay the mine, and began to film. Here's what he recalled.
The ground where I stood gave a mighty convulsion. It rocked and swayed. I gripped hold of my tripod to steady myself. Then, for all the world like a gigantic sponge, the earth rose high in the air to the height of hundreds of feet. Higher and higher it rose, and with a horrible grinding roar, the earth settles back upon itself, leaving in its place a mountain of smoke.
The explosion had done terrible damage and shattered the German defenders of No. 9 Company Reserve Infantry Regiment 119 in the immediate vicinity. Even to this day, the scars of that moment can be seen in the landscape. But it was only 7:20 am, and for those Germans who had been enduring a horrific yet largely ineffective week-long artillery bombardment in their dugouts, it was immediately clear that something was about to occur. To make matters worse, the Germans reacted quickly and a fierce fight for the Hawthorne Redoubt crater developed, in which the Germans were able to redeploy machine guns back on this hilltop overlooking the entire British position. From this view, as we see here, the British front line, the sunken road, and the no man's land they were about to cross would all be easily seen and targeted. Precisely 10 minutes after the mine went off, the British bombardment lifted from the German front lines and whistles blew to signal the infantry assault to begin. It was immediately a disaster. The race to the parapet was not a race at all. The German defenders were already manning their machine guns, and as the leading elements of B&D companies emerged from this very spot in the sunken road, they did so into a hail of well-aimed machine gun and rifle fire. In literally seconds, dozens of men were down, and within minutes, hundreds of men had fallen, often only yards from their starting positions. The men leaving the sunken road stood no chance. Those first hit were perhaps the lucky ones. Crawling as best they could, they tumbled back into the sanctuary of the road, whilst others, making it further, often fell with no hope of retreat. Perhaps the least lucky were those who made it some distance unwounded. Moving down a small bank towards the enemy line, they encountered clusters of barbed wire and had no chance but to go to ground and take whatever cover they could. Many of them are still there to this day. Back in A and C Company positions in the main line, the advance fared no better. Here's Corporal George Ashurst of C Company who recalled the moment.
It's time to go over the top. There was a corporal lying there, all blown away. I think he had been hit by a whiz-bang. He looks up at me as I pass him. Go on, Corporal, get the bastards. There were bullets flying everywhere. Run, that was the only thing in my mind. Run and dodge, expecting at any second to get hit, to feel a bullet hit me. I was zigzagging, holding my head down so that a bullet would hit my tin hat. I seemed to be dodging between them. I must have been to get there. You could hear when a bullet hit somebody. You could literally hear it hit him. Hear him groan and go down. It was mainly machine guns that cut us up. I was thinking, I have got to get forward. That was all. I dived into the sunken road, picking myself up and looking round. My God, what a sight. The whole road was strewn with dead and dying men.
Despite walking into incredibly heavy fire, the men of the Fusiliers would still push on, as would the units on their flanks. Malins, who was still in the position he had filmed the Lancs advance, also moments later captured this grainy but incredibly powerful footage showing men of the neighbouring battalion attacking across these fields under machine gun fire, with many falling in the assault. So just a few minutes after the attack had begun, the remnants of the Lancashires were clustered in the sunken road amongst their dead and wounded mates. William Caseby, who like George Ashurst had reached the sunken road, knowing that they must push on to protect the units on their flank, resolved to try again. Gathering around 75 men, Caseby led another assault, this time from a little further up the road. Despite the courage of all involved, the result was the same. Advancing just a few yards, they were pinned down with heavy losses. With no way of going forward or back, the survivors were forced to lay low under sniper and machine gun fire for the rest of the day. The fighting was so ferocious that by 8:30 AM, the attack had failed. Malins, still in the area, filming what he had hoped would be a successful attack, was relegated to recording the aftermath of a disaster. Capturing stretcher bearers braving enemy fire to bring in wounded men from no man's land. All told, the Lancashire Fusiliers went into battle that day with approximately 600 men. The battalion war diary records the butcher's bill.
The battalion was badly cut up by the enemy's machine gun fire, suffering 508 casualties and 21 officer casualties. At dusk, we returned to the trenches but held and consolidated the sunken road. The battalion fought nobly, but had no chance of success against the enemy's machine gun fire.
Tragically, the story of what happened here on the 1st of July 1916 was not unique. Of those 120,000 who went into the attack, almost half became casualties, and a staggering 19,240 were killed. That's one man for every 4.4 seconds in a 24-hour period. The worst single-day losses in British military history. Today, the Battle of the Somme is remembered by many as an abject failure, and when looking at cases like this, it's hard to argue otherwise. But we do need to remember that the Somme was not a one-day battle, but a 141-day battle, and that progress was made, albeit at a terrible cost. But that cost came on both sides. The German army also suffered heavily on the Somme, and suffered losses, particularly in experienced troops, which it could never replace. But more importantly, these assaults did have the desired effect. German troops were diverted from Verdun, the French pressure was relieved, and they did fight another day, and eventually would emerge victorious, but at a cost that even over a century on is almost impossible to fathom. So what became of those Lancashire Fusiliers who fought across this ground that July day? Lieutenant Colonel Magniac and Lieutenant Caseby both survived the Somme, but neither would outlive the war. They being killed by the same shell at the Battle of Arras in 1917. Corporal George Ashurst, though, did live to see home again. He would later write about his experiences in his memoir, A Lancashire Fusilier at War. He died in Wigan, Lancashire, in 1988, aged 93. Geoffrey Malins would live too. His film, which was not the one he had hoped or expected to make, was shown in cinemas throughout Britain. In just 6 weeks, a staggering 20 million people viewed the film, making it, to this day, one of the most watched films in British cinema history. Many of those Malins filmed would never get to see it. 149 Lancashire Fusiliers are listed as killed in action on the 1st of July, 15 of whom lay where they fell in Beaumont Hamel British Cemetery in the old no man's land. But more still were never recovered, and today more than 100 are named on the Thiepval Memorial to the Missing, several miles away, along with 72,000 fallen comrades of the Somme who have no known grave. We're really proud to share this kind of history with you for free right here on YouTube, but we can only keep doing so with your help. So if you can, please consider joining our Battle Guide Patreon at the link below. It makes a huge difference to help us keep sharing stories like these. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.